In the heart of Lafayette, in the year 1850, the sprawling plantations stretched across the rolling hills like dark green waves frozen in time, dotted with the occasional glint of sunlight bouncing off the cotton fields. To the casual observer, life seemed rigid, orderly, and painfully predictable. The white columns of the plantation houses gleamed against the southern sun, promising wealth and power, yet behind those walls, secrets simmered, waiting to burst into the open. Among these secrets, none were more dangerous, more forbidden, or more intoxicating than the story of the young plantation mistress and the man who worked the land under her command. Their story did not start with drama or declarations. It began in silence, in the fleeting moments between dusk and nightfall, when the world seemed to pause and breathe, unaware of the storm brewing on the edges of the estate. The mistress, a young woman named Clara, was known throughout Lafayette for her striking beauty, yet her reputation carried a chill. Her porcelain skin, framed by cascading auburn hair, contrasted sharply with the cold, calculating gaze she often wore like armor. Yet beneath the mask of propriety and control, there was a loneliness she could not escape. Her days were filled with the endless demands of managing the household, overseeing the fields, and maintaining appearances for visiting dignitaries. But as dusk fell and the sun dipped below the horizon, a different side of her emerged, one hidden from the scrutinizing eyes of society. It was a side that longed for connection, for warmth, for a presence that could see her not as a mistress or a lady of privilege, but as a woman. Elijah, the slave who had come to change everything for Clara, was unlike any other person she had ever encountered. He was tall, with shoulders broad and strong from years of labor, yet there was a grace in his movements, a quiet confidence that belied the chains of bondage he bore. His eyes, dark and penetrating, seemed to see straight through the carefully constructed facades of the world around him. There was intelligence there, a spark of wit, and an unwavering sense of dignity that made him stand out among the others who toiled silently in the fields. Though he spoke little, his presence was commanding. It demanded attention without demanding submission. Clara noticed this the first time she saw him, and something inside her stirred, a dangerous curiosity, a feeling she could neither name nor deny. Their encounters were at first coincidental, almost accidental. A basket left in the wrong place, a brief glance across a crowded yard, the brush of hands when passing near each other in the dim light of the late afternoon. These moments were fleeting, but they carried a weight neither could ignore. In the beginning, it was simple observation. Clara watched him, as one might watch a storm gather on the horizon, fascinated by the power and inevitability she sensed within him. Elijah, in turn, noticed her, the way her gaze lingered for just a moment longer than propriety allowed, the subtle tension in her posture whenever he approached. It was a silent recognition of mutual awareness, a recognition that what lay between them could not be spoken aloud without risking destruction. As days turned into weeks, the tension deepened. They began to communicate in small, subtle ways, gestures and looks that spoke louder than words could. A fleeting touch on a hand, a smile that lingered in the shadow of a doorway, a shared understanding in the exchange of simple tasks. Each moment was charged, electric with the thrill of forbidden connection. The world outside their private awareness, society, the plantation, the laws of the time, threatened to crush any hint of intimacy. And yet, it was precisely because of this danger that their connection deepened. They became adept at reading each other, learning the language of glances and silence, understanding that each hidden communication carried both promise and peril. The nights were their refuge. While the rest of the plantation slumbered, Clara and Elijah would find themselves drawn to the edge of the property, where the old oak tree stood sentinel, its roots deep and twisted, its branches reaching high into the night sky. Here, away from the watchful eyes of overseers and neighbors, they allowed themselves small freedoms. A whispered word, a shared laugh, a brush of the hand that lingered just a heartbeat too long. The wind whispered through the branches above, carrying their secrets, shielding them from intrusion. The moonlight cast a silver glow over the fields, illuminating their faces in a way that made them feel almost untouchable, almost free. Yet they both knew freedom was a dream, fleeting and fragile, and each night spent in each other's presence was a gamble with fate. Every encounter carried risk. The plantation was not a forgiving place for those who dared to cross social lines, and discovery could mean punishment, banishment, or worse. Stories of punishment were whispered among the slaves, tales of those who had dared to defy the rules and paid the ultimate price. Clara knew that the law and society were on one side, that her position as a mistress gave her power but not protection. Elijah understood that each step toward her was a defiance of everything he had been taught to endure silently. Yet the pull between them was magnetic, unstoppable, as if fate itself conspired to bring them together. Despite the dangers that lurked in every shadow, there were moments when fear would almost overwhelm them. A sudden footstep behind a fence, the sharp whistle of an overseer in the distance, the rustle of leaves that could betray their presence. All these small sounds turned into instruments of tension, heightening the stakes of every encounter. Yet it was in this tension that their passion found its fuel. Each risk, each stolen moment intensified the connection, making it more urgent, more real, more vital. They began to live for the moments when the world disappeared, leaving only the two of them, breathing the same air, feeling the same fear, and daring to hope. Clara's heart was a battlefield of desire and reason. She knew the social, moral, and legal boundaries she was crossing, yet she could not suppress the yearning that grew with each passing day. She questioned her sanity, wondering if her fascination was merely a fleeting fancy or something far deeper, far more dangerous. Elijah, too, wrestled with his own internal conflicts. He had been taught submission and endurance, yet in Clara he found an equal, a presence that challenged his expectations and stirred a longing he had long buried. Their relationship was a paradox, equal parts fear and longing, danger and devotion, a dance on the edge of a precipice where one misstep could mean ruin. Rumors began to circulate among those who sensed the tension but could not place it. Servants whispered of strange lights flickering near the old oak tree at night, of the mistress seen wandering the grounds alone, of the young slave caught in moments of unexplainable distraction. Yet no one could pin down the truth. Clara and Elijah moved with a careful choreography, avoiding suspicion with practiced precision. Each meeting was a gamble, and yet they could not resist, pulled forward by a force they could name. Even the natural world seemed to play a role in their clandestine romance. Storms would roll in, masking their movements with the roar of thunder. The mist that rose from the fields at dawn would cloak their parting, making it seem as if they had been touched by spirits rather than caught in human longing. Birds would scatter at their approach, animals would stir as if aware of the tension in the air, and the wind itself seemed to whisper their secret, carrying it across the fields in ways no human ear could fully comprehend. The plantation, vast and imposing, became a theater in which their drama unfolded, each moment heightened by the looming presence of the unknown. Despite the danger, despite the moral and social chains that bound them, they found a sense of belonging in one another. Their connection was a refuge from the rigid, suffocating world around them. In each other's eyes, they saw the possibility of something beyond survival, something beyond societal expectations, a fleeting taste of true connection, of love that dared to exist in defiance of all odds. Each night, when they parted under the old oak tree, there was an ache in their hearts, a longing for the next stolen moment, a hope that somehow they could carve out a space where they could exist together without fear. As time passed, their encounters became more daring. They learned the rhythms of the plantation, the schedules of overseers, the patterns of servants and neighbors. Each meeting was carefully planned, yet spontaneous in its intensity, a blend of strategy and passion. They discovered the joy of small gestures, the brushing of fingers, the exchange of a glance across a moonlit field, the shared silence that spoke volumes. These moments, though brief, carried a weight that made the mundane details of their daily lives seem distant, irrelevant, as if nothing else in the world mattered beyond this connection that defied reason. And yet, the question always loomed, how long could this continue? Each encounter carried the invisible thread of tension, a reminder that discovery would change everything. The risk of exposure was ever present, a shadow lurking behind every tree, every doorway, every glance from an unsuspecting passerby. Yet neither Clara nor Elijah could resist. Their connection was magnetic, a force that pulled them together even when reason screamed for caution. They were caught in a cycle of desire and fear, passion and prudence, a delicate balance that defined the rhythm of their days and the shape of their nights. In this world of secrecy, silence and stolen moments, their romance took on a life of its own. It was a dangerous, intoxicating and all-consuming force, one that neither could escape and neither wanted to. The plantation, with its sprawling fields and imposing mansion, became both prison and sanctuary, a place where love existed in the shadows, dangerous yet undeniable, hidden yet vivid. Their story, unspoken to the world, began to take root in the land itself, etching a memory into the very soil of Lafayette, a memory that would linger long after the plantation gates had closed for the night. Theirs was a romance defined by tension, longing, and secrecy. It was a story of two souls who dared to reach beyond the chains of society, beyond the roles assigned to them, and into the unknown territory of desire and connection. In every glance, every touch, every shared silence, there was both risk and reward, fear and exhilaration. And as the sun set over the Lafayette fields each evening, the old oak tree standing as witness, Clara and Elijah knew that they had discovered something rare, something precious, a love that defied the world and survived in the brief, fleeting moments when they could be together, unseen, and utterly alive. The morning the letter appeared, the plantation seemed ordinary at first glance. Sunlight glinted off the dewy leaves, the air smelled of damp earth and cotton, and the faint chatter of servants going about their work filled the spaces between the grand columns and shadowed walkways. Yet, beneath this familiar routine, a new tension pulsed through the estate, invisible but undeniable. Clara discovered it first, a small folded piece of paper resting atop the worn wood of the main hall table. It had not been there the night before, and there was no indication of who might have left it. The handwriting was deliberate, fluid, elegant, in a way that suggested both education and intent, and yet there was an edge of something darker, a warning hidden beneath the flourishes of ink. She approached it cautiously, her pulse quickening with the mix of fear and curiosity. Every instinct screamed that she should discard it, that it was dangerous, that it could only herald trouble. And yet she could not resist. With trembling fingers, she unfolded the paper and read the lines, each word like a spark that ignited her imagination and her anxiety at the same time. The letter spoke of a way to unite her with Elijah, the man whose presence had come to dominate her thoughts, who haunted her days and consumed her nights. It was tantalizing in its promise, offering a glimmer of hope that their stolen moments could become more than fleeting whispers under the moon. But alongside the promise was a shadow, a hint of peril woven into the curves of ink, reminding her that every step toward the forbidden carried consequences that could ruin them both. Elijah's reaction when she showed him the letter was different. He was cautious in a way that bordered on suspicion. He studied the paper, turning it in his hands, feeling its weight, examining the curves of the handwriting and the subtle choices of words. His mind, trained to notice danger in every shadow, immediately considered the possibilities. It could be a trap, a test, or even a cruel joke, designed to expose their secret and destroy the fragile connection they had nurtured so carefully. And yet, there was something undeniable about the letter, a pulse of hope embedded within the ink, a sense that the hand that wrote it understood, in some secret, dangerous way, the desires and needs that consumed both of them. In the days that followed, the letter became a silent presence between them. Neither could fully discuss it in the open. There were always ears that might listen, eyes that might watch. Instead, it was handled carefully, examined in moments of privacy, its cryptic suggestions weighed and considered. They spoke in cautious whispers, discussing possibilities in code, rehearsing every move as if preparing for a dance that could go horribly wrong with a single misstep. The letter was both a guide and a gauntlet, challenging them to act, to defy, to risk, and in doing so, it intensified the bond that already existed between them. The plantation, once merely a backdrop for their secret, now seemed alive with potential threats. Every servant, every overseer, every passing neighbor could become a harbinger of disaster. Clara felt eyes upon her even when none were present, her imagination tainted by the possibility that the letter's origin was sinister. Elijah, too, became vigilant, more attuned to the rhythm of the estate, noting every unusual sound, every delay in footsteps, every subtle shift in behavior that might signal suspicion. It was as if the letter had awakened a latent awareness in both of them, forcing them to navigate the treacherous terrain of desire, fear, and secrecy with more precision than ever before. Despite the danger, the letter stirred something that neither could ignore: hope. It suggested a path, however fragile, toward a possibility they had long dreamed of. Clara, who had spent her life confined by expectation and propriety, allowed herself for the first time to imagine a life in which she could openly acknowledge her feelings, a life in which the walls of her world did not dictate the limits of her heart. Elijah, too, dared to consider what freedom might mean beyond the literal chains he bore. The letter was more than paper. It was a spark of rebellion, a challenge to the order that governed them, and a chance to claim something deeply human in a world determined to deny them that right. As the days passed, they began to test the possibilities outlined in the letter. Every step was measured, deliberate, and fraught with tension. They devised secret signals to communicate across the fields, patterns in the way Clara laid out her work, subtle gestures when passing each other in the shadowed hallways, coded words spoken under the guise of casual conversation. The letter had become a catalyst, pushing them to refine their methods, to become more inventive, more daring, more attuned to each other than ever before. Each successful interaction reinforced their connection, proving that even in the face of overwhelming danger, their bond could withstand scrutiny and survive. Yet the letter also brought fear, a shadow that could not be dismissed. They imagined the worst-case scenarios: the overseer discovering their plan, neighbors spreading rumors that could reach the authorities, a betrayal from someone close who resented the attention Elijah received, or the risk Clara was taking. Every choice carried weight. Every glance could be misinterpreted. Every word could trigger suspicion. They became masters of subtlety, learning to conceal excitement, to cloak desire, to navigate the line between visibility and invisibility with the skill of those who live constantly on the edge of danger. One evening, under the fading light of a crimson sunset, they decided to act on the letter's instructions. It was a carefully orchestrated meeting designed to test whether the promises it contained were genuine. The old oak tree at the edge of the property became the rendezvous point once again, its roots twisted and gnarled, its branches reaching like silent sentinels into the night. As Clara approached, she felt her pulse quicken, each step heavy with anticipation and fear. Elijah waited, hidden in the shadows, his body tense, his mind racing with possibilities. The air was thick with expectation, a quiet storm that mirrored the tumult of their hearts. When they finally met, the letter was exchanged in silence, its contents discussed in whispers so soft that even the wind seemed to hesitate in carrying them. Every word was weighed, every suggestion scrutinized. They discussed routes, timings, contingencies, and signals, transforming the poetic mystery of the letter into a plan of action. It was an intoxicating experience, filled with both exhilaration and dread. The risk was immense, yet the thrill of potential success, the taste of what might be achieved, made the danger almost irrelevant. In those moments, they existed solely for each other, their connection heightened by the stakes, made more vivid by the shadows that surrounded them. As they parted that night, the letter remained a silent presence, a guide that both terrified and inspired them. Each step back to the plantation house was a meditation on possibility, a negotiation between hope and fear. The events of the evening replayed endlessly in their minds, the glances, the whispered strategies, the brush of fingers that lingered too long. And each recollection was charged with emotion, a reminder of the life they could create together if they dared. To continue. In the following weeks, the letter continued to shape their world. They began to notice patterns in the behavior of those around them, subtle cues that might indicate suspicion or opportunity. They became more attuned to the rhythms of the plantation, learning when it was safest to meet, when it was necessary to hide, and how to navigate the complex social dynamics that governed their every move. Each day was a delicate dance, a balance between desire and caution, between hope and the constant threat of discovery. The letter itself became almost a talisman, a symbol of their connection and their rebellion. Clara carried it carefully, memorizing phrases, studying the nuances of the handwriting, reflecting on the intentions of the unknown author. Elijah treated it with the same reverence, analyzing each line for hidden meaning, testing assumptions, and preparing for every possible outcome. It was more than paper. It was a key to a potential future, a bridge between the life they had and the life they longed for, and yet, even as they embraced the promise of the letter, the danger loomed. The plantation was a world governed by strict rules, and any deviation from those rules could have disastrous consequences. They had to navigate the scrutiny of overseers, the gossip of neighbors, the unpredictable loyalty of fellow slaves, and the ever-present threat of betrayal. Every move was calculated, every encounter carefully orchestrated. The letter had offered a path, but it was a path fraught with peril, and each step required courage, intelligence, and unwavering trust between them. Through it all, their bond deepened. The letter had ignited something in them that went beyond physical attraction or mere curiosity. It had awakened a shared understanding, a recognition that they were linked not just by desire, but by the courage to defy the impossible, the audax. To hope in a world designed to crush that hope. Each glance, each secret meeting, each whispered word reinforced their connection, creating a foundation that was as fragile as it was powerful. They were tethered together by secrecy, by longing, and by the promise of a future that might never arrive, yet was worth risking everything to pursue. The plantation, with its sprawling fields, grand mansion, and hidden corners, became a living stage for their drama. Every shadow held possibility, every sound carried potential danger, and every moment of silence was filled with the tension of unspoken words. The letter had introduced both risk and promise, and navigating that duality became the defining challenge of their days. Clara and Elijah learned to read each other with precision, to anticipate needs, fears, and desires, and to act with a confidence born of necessity. By the time the days turned into weeks, the letter had transformed their lives. It had introduced a dangerous hope, a sense of purpose, and a path toward connection that neither had dared to imagine before. It had tested their courage, sharpened their wits, and deepened their bond in ways that nothing else could. In its cryptic, elegant lines, they had found a roadmap not just for their romance, but for a rebellion against the rigid confines of the world around them. It was a silent guide, a whisper in the night, a spark that threatened to ignite a fire that could consume them all, but one they were willing to follow nonetheless. The plantation, vast and sprawling, held more secrets than anyone could imagine. To the casual observer, it was simply a grand estate, the kind of place that inspired awe and envy, with its white columns, manicured gardens, and endless fields of cotton stretching toward the horizon. But for Clara and Elijah, it was a labyrinth of hidden spaces, abandoned barns, and neglected core. Nurs where shadows pooled like liquid, where time seemed to bend, and where the world beyond the property's borders could not reach them. Each nook became a sanctuary, a private stage where their dangerous romance could unfold without interference, and each meeting there carried the thrill of risk that heightened their connection to almost unbearable intensity. Their first discovery of these hidden spaces was accidental. One late afternoon, Clara wandered further into the plantation than she had ever dared before, ostensibly inspecting the fields, ostensibly occupied with the duties imposed on her by her position. But her instincts drew her toward a small, overgrown path behind the old barn, a path that twisted and turned beneath the branches of gnarled trees. She found herself in a small clearing, enclosed on all sides by walls of dense ivy and the remnants of a long-forgotten shed. It was as if the world had peeled away, leaving her alone in a place that existed solely for those willing to seek it. When Elijah arrived later that evening, following her discreet signals, the hidden space became their first clandestine meeting point, a place that would soon acquire profound significance in their lives. In these secret corners, the ordinary rules of plantation life dissolved. The rigid hierarchy, the unspoken codes of conduct, and the ever-present threat of punishment melted away beneath the canopy of darkness and the thrill of concealment. Here, Clara and Elijah could exist as themselves, without the constraints imposed by their assigned roles. Every glance, every touch, every whispered word was imbued with meaning. The risk made their connection more intense, each meeting a heady mix of fear and exhilaration that neither had experienced before. The world outside became distant, irrelevant, a place they could observe but not inhabit, as if their secret spaces existed. In a parallel reality carved from courage, longing, and defiance, the abandoned barn became their favorite. Its walls were thick and weathered, the wood creaking under the weight of history and neglect. Dust motes floated in the slanting rays of sunlight that filtered through gaps in the boards, creating a dreamlike atmosphere that made every meeting feel cinematic, almost surreal. They would meet there in the late afternoons, long before the sun had fully descended, to speak in whispers, to exchange stolen glances, and to simply exist in each other's presence. Clara would often bring small tokens from the house, items she had managed to hide, while Elijah would contribute what he could, simple gestures that carried immense emotional weight. In that barn, they were architects of a private world, constructing moments of intimacy from the fragments of a society that sought to deny them such connection. The thrill of these meetings was compounded by the constant awareness of danger. Every creak of the floorboards, every stray shadow, every sudden noise could signal discovery. The overseer's rounds were unpredictable, and even the slaves who worked in other parts of the plantation could inadvertently become witnesses to their secret. Yet it was precisely this danger that made each encounter intoxicating. The tension sharpened their senses, made their hearts pound, and forced them to focus on each other with a clarity that bordered on obsession. In those moments they were acutely aware of the stakes, and the intimacy they shared was heightened by the knowledge that it could be snatched away at any second. They developed elaborate rituals to ensure safety. Clara would wait near the edge of the clearing, hidden behind a tangle of ivy, signaling with subtle gestures when the coast was clear. Elijah would approach from the opposite direction, moving silently through the shad. Ours, his senses alert to every sound and movement. They would check for the presence of others, listen for distant voices, and only proceed when the space was confirmed safe. The process became almost ritualistic, a combination of strategy and instinct that underscored the seriousness of their endeavor. Yet despite the careful planning, there was always room for spontaneity, a brief touch, a shared laugh, a look that spoke volumes without words. These moments became the heartbeat of their romance, the measure of their courage, and the proof that love could flourish even in the darkest, most constrained circumstances. The hidden spaces were not merely physical, they were symbolic as well. Each corner of the plantation where they met represented a small rebellion against the social order, a defiance of the boundaries that sought to confine them. Clara's very presence in these spaces challenged the expectations imposed upon her as a mistress, while Elijah's willingness to risk exposure defied the rules that bound him as a slave. Together, they transformed these neglected corners into sanctuaries of resistance, turning fear into a catalyst for passion, and constraint into a proving ground for their connection. One night, as a storm rolled across the fields, they found themselves in the barn, rain lashing against the walls, wind rattling the loose boards, thunder echoing through the night. The storm outside mirrored the storm within them, a perfect metaphor for the intensity of their feelings and the chaos surrounding their secret. They huddled together in the center of the barn, the rain masking any sounds they might make, the darkness concealing their faces from anyone who might stumble upon them. In that moment, the world shrank to the space between them, to the shared heartbeat, to the warmth of hands and the electricity of glances. Every fear, every threat, every consequence seemed to fade, leaving only the undeniable reality of their bond. The hidden corners also became classrooms of understanding where they learned about each other's worlds in ways that could never have occurred under normal circumstances. Clara discovered the weight Elijah carried, not just the physical labor, but the psychological toll of living under constant surveillance and systemic oppression. Elijah, in turn, glimpsed the constraints imposed upon Clara by societal expectation and family pressure, the invisible chains of propriety and reputation that bound her as tightly as any shackle. Their meetings became opportunities to exchange knowledge, empathy, and insight, deepening their connection beyond desire into something more profound, more dangerous, and more transformative. Over time, their rendezvous became increasingly daring. They explored other hidden areas, a forgotten cellar beneath the main house, the overgrown paths along the riverbank, the dense thickets behind the garden walls. Each new location brought new risks and new excitement. The anticipation of discovery added a layer of intensity to every encounter, forcing them to move with both care and urgency. Every brush of hands, every whispered confession, every stolen moment was heightened by the proximity of danger, as if the very possibility of being caught made their connection stronger, sharper, and more vital. Communication between their meetings also evolved. They developed subtle signs and messages, leaving items in agreed-upon locations, arranging objects to convey meaning, and learning to read each other's intentions from the slightest shift in posture or glance. The hidden corners became not just meeting places, but instruments of a complex, silent dialogue where each movement and gesture carried significance beyond the visible. The more they refined these methods, the more adept they became at living in two worlds simultaneously, the public world of the plantation and the private world of their secret connection. The tension between public appearance and private truth weighed heavily on both of them. Clara had to maintain the facade of the obedient, composed mistress, interacting with guests, managing the household, and overseeing the laborers, all while harboring a forbidden love that could destroy her reputation and her life if revealed. Elijah had to navigate the strict hierarchies and expectations imposed upon him as a slave, hiding his intelligence, his autonomy, and his feelings, all while risking punishment and possibly death. The hidden corners offered a respite from these pressures, a temporary escape from the constant scrutiny and oppression that defined their daily existence. As their meetings continued, the plantation itself seemed to take on a new character. The abandoned barn, the ivy-covered clearing, the hidden cellar. They were no longer merely structures. They were silent witnesses to a love that dared to exist where it should not. The walls absorbed their whispered confessions, the shadows held their stolen touches, and the air carried the tension and anticipation that defined each encounter. The plantation became both ally and adversary, a living entity that challenged and protected them in equal measure, shaping the rhythm of their secret, forbidden romance. With every meeting, their understanding of each other deepened. Clara learned to trust Elijah implicitly, relying on his judgment, his discretion, and his unwavering courage. Elijah, in turn, learned to interpret Clara's subtle cues, her careful gestures, and the hidden signals that conveyed her intentions and desires. Their connection became a complex tapestry woven from secrecy, fear, longing, and love, each thread reinforcing the others, creating a bond that was as fragile as it was unbreakable. In these hidden corners, moments of pure intimacy unfolded, a hand lightly resting on a shoulder, a whispered word that carried volumes, a glance that spoke of hope and desire. Each became a ritual, a sacred act performed in defiance of the world that sought to keep them apart. The thrill of the forbidden amplified every sensation, every emotion, making the simplest acts feel monumental. Even the air seemed charged with electricity when they were together, the silence of the hidden spaces amplifying the intensity of their presence and their connection. And yet, with every triumph came the shadow of danger. They knew that discovery could come at any moment. Every creak of the barn floor, every unexpected noise from the house, every shadow that seemed too close reminded them that their secret was fragile, temporary, and perilously exposed. Yet it was precisely this tension that gave their meetings urgency, depth, and meaning. The risk was not merely a threat, it was a catalyst, sharpening their senses, intensifying their emotions, and creating a bond forged in fire and secrecy. Through months of clandestine meetings, the hidden corners of the plantation became more than places. They became symbols of defiance, resilience, and the power of human connection. In each shadowed nook, under each gnarled tree, they built a world of their own, one in which love could exist, if only for a moment, beyond the constraints of society, beyond the reach of the overseer, beyond the cruelty of a world that sought to keep them apart. The hidden spaces became sanctuaries of rebellion, proving that even in the darkest, most oppressive circumstances, love could flourish, daring to exist where it was least expected and most forbidden. Not everyone on the plantation remained oblivious to the developing bond between Clara and Elijah. Among the workers, Eyre was one who watched with a quiet intensity, a figure who seemed to exist in the margins of their world, noticing details others overlooked. His name was Thomas, a fellow slave whose bitterness had long simmered beneath a surface of obedience. Perhaps it was jealousy, or perhaps a perverse sense of duty to the social hierarchy that bound them all. But something in him stirred unease whenever he caught sight of Elijah and the mistress together. He could sense the unusual glances, the subtle gestures, and the coded communications, even if he could not fully understand them. Something was different, something forbidden, and Thomas was determined to uncover it. At first, his observations were subtle, almost imperceptible. He lingered near the edges of fields, offering casual glances under the guise of work. He noted the timing of meetings, the paths they chose, and the secret spaces that seemed to serve as their rendezvous points. He spoke little of what he noticed, storing the information like a weapon to be wielded at the right moment. Every glance, every whispered conversation he overheard, added pieces to a puzzle he was intent on solving. In his mind, he justified his curiosity with morality and fear. To him, the world had rules, and breaking them could not be tolerated, especially when it involved a mistress and a man bound by servitude. As days turned into weeks, Thomas's attention became more focused, more deliberate. He began testing the vigilance of the overseers, subtly dropping hints, planting seeds of suspicion without making outright accusations. It was a dangerous game, and he knew it. If misread, it could result in severe punishment for him, but the thrill of control, of knowing that he might wield power over the lives of Clara and Elijah, was intoxicating. He walked the plantation with eyes that missed nothing, ears attuned to every sound, and a mind constantly spinning theories, possibilities, and contingencies. The invisible tension he created became almost a physical presence, pressing on the lovers even when they could not see him. Clara and Elijah soon sensed the change. The quiet spaces that had once felt safe now carried a weight of suspicion, a sense that someone was watching, listening, waiting. It was subtle at first, a shadow that lingered too long, a pair of eyes that seemed to follow from afar, a misstep that felt like a trap. Fear became an uninvited companion, intertwining with their passion, heightening every glance, every touch, every whispered word. Their hearts raced not just with the thrill of love, but with the constant awareness of the stakes, of the ever-present possibility that Thomas might expose them at any moment. Despite the tension, their courage did not waver. If anything, the threat made their bond stronger, sharper, more resilient. Each meeting became a calculated risk, a deliberate act of rebellion against the invisible forces closing in around them. They refined their signals, adjusted their timings, and devised new methods to evade detection. Every step was measured, yet there was an undeniable electricity in the danger, a heightened intensity that made their stolen moments feel more profound, more urgent, more alive. Fear became a fuel, driving their connection to levels of intensity neither had thought possible. Thomas, meanwhile, grew bolder. He began leaving small traces, subtle hints meant to test whether overseers were paying attention. A misplaced object here, a casual comment there, each designed to probe the limits of their secrecy. Clara and Elijah noticed, of course, and their vigilance increased. They studied each movement of Thomas with a mix of suspicion and caution, learning to anticipate his actions, to decipher his intentions, and to outmaneuver him in a silent game of observation and counter-observation. The plantation became a chessboard, with each actor moving carefully, strategically, aware that a single misstep could have devastating consequences. The psychological impact of Thomas's scrutiny was profound. Clara felt the weight of societal expectation pressing down harder than ever, the invisible chains of propriety tightening around her. She was aware that one misjudged action could ruin her reputation, endanger Elijah, and potentially destroy the fragile world they had built. Elijah, too, felt the pressure, the constant need to navigate the treacherous terrain of suspicion, to anticipate danger, and to protect both himself and Clara. The thrill of their romance was inseparable from the fear of exposure, creating a tension so intense that every glance and touch felt like a declaration of defiance and courage. Thomas's jealousy and suspicion were not purely personal, they were amplified by his understanding of the social order. He had internalized the rules of the plantation, the hierarchy that placed the mistress above him and the slaves beneath her. To witness a relationship that defied these roles was not merely disturbing, it was an affront, a disruption to the world as he had always known it. In his mind, his actions were justified, even righteous. By observing, by hinting, by sowing seeds of doubt, he believed he was restoring balance, maintaining order, and protecting the very structure that kept them all alive, even if it came at the expense of happiness. As Thomas escalated his efforts, the tension reached a boiling point. He began shadowing Elijah more closely, tracking his movements from the fields to the barn, noting every secret gesture, every whispered conversation. He started to piece together the locations of their clandestine meetings, their hidden corners, and the signals that connected them. The DA. Anger became almost palpable, a physical presence that hung over Clara and Elijah, infiltrating their sanctuary and transforming every stolen moment into a battle of wits and courage. The lovers responded with ingenuity. They altered meeting points, developed new codes, and created diversions to mislead Thomas and anyone else who might be observing. Every encounter became a test of strategy, a game of anticipation and improvisation, blending fear and desire in a way that sharpened their senses and deepened their connection. Their love, once fragile and tentative, now took on a fierce, almost combative quality, forged in the fires of secrecy and the constant threat of exposure. The stakes escalated further when Thomas began speaking in hushed tones to the overseers, planting vague suggestions, using the language of suspicion without directly accusing anyone. The overseers, trained to detect transgressions but not subtle enough to catch coded communications, responded with increased vigilance. Clara and Elijah felt the pressure mounting with every passing day, each shadow and sound potentially signaling disaster. Yet, this looming threat also crystallized their determination. They realized that their connection was worth the risk, that the intensity of their love could not be extinguished by fear alone. The psychological dance between the rival and the lovers became a constant tension that defined their days and nights. Every choice they made, every step they took, every meeting they planned was influenced by the presence of Thomas, even when he was not physically near. His eyes, imagined or real, hovered over them, a ghost of scrutiny that forced them to sharpen their senses, anticipate danger, and navigate the treacherous terrain of forbidden love with extraordinary precision. Fear, desire, and strategy became inseparable elements of their lives, weaving together, into a complex, high-stakes tapestry that neither could escape. The plantation itself seemed to take on a new dimension. The fields, barns, and hidden corners were no longer merely spaces. They were stages for a silent drama, arenas of risk and triumph. Every creak of a floorboard, every whisper in the night, every shifting shadow held meaning. Clara and Elijah moved through these spaces with heightened awareness, attuned to the rhythms of the world and the machinations of Thomas. Their love was a quiet rebellion, a defiance of every rule and expectation, but it was also a test of intellect, courage, and resilience. Despite the ever-present threat, their bond deepened. The shared danger became a unifying force, a crucible in which their emotions were refined and intensified. Every stolen glance, every whispered word, every brush of fingers carried greater significance, charged with the knowledge that discovery could come at any moment. They learned to trust each other implicitly, to anticipate reactions, and to communicate in ways that were invisible to all but themselves. In the midst of fear, they found strength, and in the midst of danger, they discovered the depth and resilience of their connection. Thomas's actions, though driven by jealousy and suspicion, inadvertently strengthened their love. By creating obstacles, by increasing the tension, by forcing the lovers to refine their methods and anticipate danger, he acted as an unintentional catalyst for intimacy. Each challenge they faced together became a testament to their courage, their ingenuity, and the intensity of their feelings. What might have been simple affection in a world without scrutiny became a profound, multi-layered connection that transcended the ordinary, a love forged in the crucible of risk and defiance. As weeks passed, Thomas's vigilance remained relentless, yet Clara and Elijah adapted. They learned to move with subtlety, to read each other's intentions in a glance, to communicate in ways that were imperceptible to anyone else. Their meetings became increasingly complex, a delicate dance of observation, anticipation, and improvisation. The threat of exposure lent every moment urgency, turning ordinary interactions into extraordinary demonstrations of trust and commitment. Each encounter became a victory, a triumph over fear, suspicion, and the rigid structures that sought to control them. The psychological impact of the rivals' suspicion was profound and enduring. Clara became more aware of her own courage and ingenuity, discovering reserves of strength she had never known. Elijah sharpened his awareness, his intelligence, and his ability to navigate a world that sought to confine him. Together they transformed fear into strategy, danger into passion, and threat into intimacy. The plantation, once a symbol of oppression, became a crucible for transformation, where love, courage, and resilience flourished in defiance of expectation. In the end, the rivals' suspicion elevated their connection to new heights. Every glance, every whispered word, every secret meeting carried the weight of risk and the exhilaration of defiance. The threat of discovery, rather than destroying their bond, intensified it, forging a connection that was as deep as it was dangerous. In the shadows of the plantation, under the constant scrutiny of a jealous rival and the ever-present threat of exposure, Clara and Elijah discovered the true meaning of courage, loyalty, and love. A love that dared to exist against all odds, a love that would endure long after the world sought to crush it. The night of their escape arrived like a storm breaking over the horizon, heavy with anticipation, charged with danger, and alive with the promise of freedom. For weeks, Clara and Elijah had planned. Ned meticulously, memorizing the rhythms of the plantation, noting the routines of overseers, and mapping secret paths through fields, forests, and swampland. Every detail had been considered, every contingency accounted for. Yet, despite the careful planning, the weight of uncertainty pressed upon them like a physical force, making each heartbeat thunder in their chests with equal parts fear and exhilaration. This was the night that would define their lives, the moment when dreams of liberation collided with the harsh reality of risk. Clara could hardly sleep in the hours leading up to their departure. Her mind was a whirlwind of strategy, hope, and fear. Every creak in the house, every whisper of the wind through the shutters seemed to signal danger, yet it was also a reminder that the world they were leaving behind was full of chains they could no longer endure. She moved quietly through the mansion, checking supplies, ensuring that nothing could betray their presence, and reviewing the secret routes one last time in her mind. Each movement was deliberate, precise, and calculated, a testament to the courage that had grown within her through months of secrecy, risk, and love. Elijah, too, felt the tension mounting. He had prepared for this moment countless times in his mind, yet anticipation made it more immediate, more terrifying, more real. Every muscle in his body was alert, tuned to the faintest sound, the slightest movement, the possibility of discovery. He had carried the weight of hope for both of them, knowing that failure could mean punishment, death, or the loss of everything they had dared to imagine together. Yet in his heart, a flame of resolve burned brighter than fear. He had learned to trust Clara implicitly, and their shared courage created a bond that made the impossible seem achievable. As the clock struck midnight, they moved through the shadow. The moon hung low in the sky, casting silver light over the plantation, illuminating their path without betraying them to prying eyes. Every step was deliberate, measured, as they navigated the familiar yet treacherous terrain. The hidden corners and secret paths that had been their sanctuary now became the arteries of their escape, guiding them away from the mansion and toward the unknown. Every creak of a branch, every rustle of leaves, felt amplified in the tense silence of the night, a reminder that discovery could come at any moment. The first obstacle came sooner than expected. A lantern flickered in the distance, signaling the presence of an overseer patrolling the fields. Elijah froze, pressing Clara close, his body taut with anticipation. They waited, hearts pounding, as the overseer passed without incident, a figure oblivious to the danger inches away. The moment was fleeting but transformative. Every near miss heightened their awareness, sharpened their instincts, and reinforced the stakes of their daring flight. It was a reminder that freedom was not easily claimed, that every step toward it required courage, cunning, and a willingness to embrace uncertainty. They reached the edge of the fields, where the forest began, dark and impenetrable. The trees stood like sentinels, their branches entwined overhead, casting long shadows that offered both concealment and threat. Here, the familiarity of the plantation gave way to the unknown, a world uncharted yet full of possibility. Clara and Elijah moved quickly but cautiously, their footsteps silent against the carpet of leaves and moss. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and foliage, and the only sounds were the distant calls of nocturnal creatures and the rhythmic beating of their hearts. Every step into the forest was a step further from the life they had known, further from the safety of routine and structure, and further into the realm of uncertainty. Yet it was also a step toward liberation, toward the life they had long dreamed of. The forest became a metaphor for their journey, dark, treacherous, and unpredictable, yet filled with the promise of new beginnings. Each obstacle they encountered, a fallen branch, a hidden root, the sudden cry of an animal, tested their resolve, but also strengthened it, forging a bond that was now inseparable from the challenges they faced together. As dawn approached, the storm they had anticipated arrived. Rain began to fall, first in light droplets that kissed their skin, then in heavier sheets that pounded against the canopy above. The storm, which might have been seen as a hindrance, became an ally, masking their movements, concealing their tracks, and adding a sense of drama to their flight. Water pooled in the low areas of the forest, mud clung to their boots, and wind whipped through the trees, but they pressed forward, driven by necessity, courage, and the unyielding desire for freedom. Every sense was heightened, the smell of wet earth, the sound of rushing water, the feel of rain-soaked clothing against skin, all merging into a vivid tapestry of sensation that underscored the intensity of their journey. The river was their final test, a barrier that separated them from the first promise of true freedom. Its waters were swollen from the storm, dark and roaring, a formidable obstacle that required both physical strength and daring. Elijah scouted the safest crossing point, testing the current, estimating the depth, and calculating the timing needed to move swiftly without being swept away. Clara followed his lead, trusting his judgment, her faith in him unwavering despite the fear gnawing at the edges of her M. The crossing demanded every ounce of courage they possessed, every ounce of trust in each other, and every ounce of determination to survive. They plunged into the river, the icy water biting at their skin, the current tugging at their limbs, yet they pressed on, moving with synchronized effort, a unit forged by shared struggle and unwavering connection. Every step was a battle against the elements, against fatigue, against fear itself. The river roared around them, threatening to drag them into its depths, but they held fast, driven by the vision of a life unbound, a life of possibility, and the certainty that nothing could separate them if they refused to let it. Emerging on the opposite bank, soaked and exhausted, they allowed themselves a brief moment of triumph. The plantation was behind them, a world of oppression and danger left in the shadows. Ahead lay the unknown, a landscape of possibility, freedom, and hope. The storm continued to rage, yet in the chaos of wind and rain there was a strange clarity, a sense that the world itself acknowledged their bravery, their audacity, and their love. In that moment they were no longer mistress and slave, no longer bound by societal expectation or fear of discovery. They were simply two human beings daring to claim the life that had been denied to them for so long. The journey beyond the plantation was arduous. They navigated dense forests, hidden paths, and treacherous swampland, relying on instinct, knowledge of the land, and the guidance of each other. Each day brought new challenges, hunger, fatigue, and the constant threat of being discovered. Yet their determination never wavered. Every obstacle overcame together strengthened their bond, solidifying the trust, loyalty, and love that had grown over months of secrecy, danger, and clandestine encounters. As word of their disappearance spread, the plantation erupted in rumor and speculation. Some claimed they had drowned in the swollen river, carried away by the storm, their bodies never to be found. Others whispered that they had sought refuge in a distant town, starting anew far from the oppressive gaze of Lafayette. For Clara and Elijah, the uncertainty of how their story would be perceived mattered little. They were alive, together, and free, an extraordinary outcome in a world that had offered them nothing but constraint and cruelty. In the days and weeks that followed, their journey continued, moving farther from the plantation and deeper into the realm of possibility. They encountered moments of fear and scarcity, yet also moments of breathtaking beauty and human kindness. Strangers offered shelter, small acts of assistance that reminded them that even in a world dominated by oppression, compassion could be found. Each experience reinforced the fragility and value of their freedom, the preciousness of the life they had fought to claim, and the extraordinary nature of the bond that had sustained them through danger, fear, and uncertainty. The legend of their escape grew, whispered among slaves, servants, and townspeople alike. Their story became a tale of audacity, defiance, and love that transcended the rigid boundaries of society. The image of a young mistress and a slave daring to flee together, risking everything for a chance at freedom, captured imaginations, inspiring both fear and hope. It was a story that would be recounted for generations, a narrative of courage, passion, and the relentless pursuit of a life unbound by chains, both literal and metaphorical. In the end, Clara and Elijah found a place where they could begin anew. Whether in a distant settlement, a hidden community, or a place entirely unknown, they embraced the freedom they had longed for, a life defined not by social expectation, but by joy. Their journey had transformed them, forging a connection that was both profound and unbreakable. The trials they endured, the dangers they faced, and the obstacles they overcame became the foundation of a love that was at once fragile and extraordinary, delicate yet unshakable. Even as the years passed, the story of their daring escape lingered in the collective memory of Lafayette. It became legend, a tale whispered in the night, a cautionary yet romantic story of audacity, love, and defiance. The old oak tree at the edge of the plantation, the hidden barn, the secret paths, all became symbols of a romance that dared to exist in the shadow of oppression, a narrative of courage, desire, and the indomitable human spirit. For Clara and Elijah, the plantation remained a memory, a chapter of struggle and longing, but it no longer defined them. They had claimed their future, crafted from determination, love, and the unyielding refusal to accept the limits imposed upon them by a world determined to deny their humanity.